And I'll give you a little bit of background. First off, just a little bit of background about me. I think I've met quite a few of you over the course of today at different sessions. I'm the CTO for Amplified IT and also one of the founders. But our focus, Amplified IT's focus, is always setting out the best practices for schools using Google Apps. All of our kind of background is actually in the building schools for future and actually redesigning schools to move into the cloud. And our whole aim is to try and create roadmaps for schools to ensure that they're going to have the most success. Whatever that initiative is or whatever the goals of the school are, there's some key things that you need to put in place and making sure you've kind of got a roadmap of where you go. And I think I mentioned at one of my previous sessions earlier on today and asked, you know, how many people had a plan for Google Apps? And I think that 1 or 2 hands went up, right? And that's one of the things we've found over and over again, that people don't have a plan of how they're going to use Google Apps in their schools. So then we really have to ask ourselves, how do we know when we're successful? How do other people, whether that's leadership or teachers, know which direction we're going? But then also, when we're talking about the other infrastructure that we have within our schools, how does that support us? How do our decisions in that support us in where we're going as well? And actually the worst thing is the fact that Google constantly changes and innovates. It's fantastic. But the only problem is that if we don't have a plan, we don't know how this new release by Google, this new feature, is going to change our plan or the direction we're going. So I definitely recommend people actually starting to think about creating a roadmap. So the key thing is when we're looking at Google Apps, there's a whole plethora of tools. There's a whole set of tools that we can kind of talk about. But the main thing is you don't have to do them all at once. Use them all at once. They should support initiatives that you're using. These tools should be invisible, essentially, to assist your teachers or assist your principals and administration to get their job done. It shouldn't be about deploying the tools. It should be about helping us get to the goals that we have quicker. So that's certainly something I would be saying that we should be focusing on, these kind of things of communication, collaboration, publishing, and also managing devices. But we want to use and make sure that we've got that plan moving forward and use the admin console to ensure we've got kind of best practices in mind. Now, for those that are joined us on the Hangout on Air, there's a Pear Deck. So if you do want to join this Pear Deck, if you go to peardeck.com/join and maybe open up a new tab, one of the things you can do if you want to, just the same way as I've got this Pear Deck here, what you can do is just pin the tab so you don't close that down, and I'll be coming back to this throughout today. Bless you.
Bless you.
So once you've actually joined there, let's just do a few things and just ask this question again. What school district are you from? So everyone in the room, those of you that joined the Pear Deck, if you do look at your Pear Deck right now, you should see a little bit that you can go and type in. I've got 2 responses. I'm just going to go and view this as we're seeing all the different responses coming in here. So we've got all the different schools coming across the board here. So one of the things with this is just a simple example. Pear Deck, it's one of our sponsors downstairs, but the teachers can use this tool to kind of get feedback from students in the room in a very easy standpoint. And the key thing is this ties into Google Apps and Google Drive, that I can save or actually share out your responses here in Google Drive. So let's just go and look at a couple more things, and I think that this is one of the things that I'd like to start with. How well do you feel your GAF domain is configured for staff and students? Right? So how well do you feel that your GAF domain, and I'm going to come back to this question at the end, right, and seeing how people actually feel, that people are generally going in that middle ground there, right? And one of the things is as people are actually answering this question, maybe wavering between things, right? So what I'm going to do just now as we kind of go forward here, I'm just going to go and lock people's responses, right? Sorry, you don't count. But as we're looking through here, so people are in the middle ground of where they think they are, and we're going to ask this question at the end as well, which will be interesting for us. So let's go and look at a couple of things. One of the key things that we start with our audit, we kind of focus on, and we do our audit for a lot of domains, and we've worked with over 2,500 in the last couple of years. But the key thing is the 4 quadrants that we're going to be talking about: operations and GAF management. So the way that we've set up our GAF domain, the way that we manage it day to day, but then also going into the service configurations, right? All the different services that we might be releasing to students and what access they have. We're going to be looking at security and compliance, and then that last piece, just looking at adoptions and usage as well. But let's just go and make sure and just talk about OU structure. This is the most basic thing, right, that we can do. This is actually the way that Google Apps actually applies policy. So when we're talking about settings, within Google Apps, they all come from what OU do you happen to be in. How many people here manage Active Directory? Is there many people manage Active Directory? The way that we do that, right, is that we apply group policies, right? And that's security groups that we have. But in Google Apps, we don't have that option. We actually manage it by OUs. So if we split this classroom up, that front row, this is grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, as we go back. I can set settings based on each OU, each bucket that we've got. Or I could actually separate this off and see this. See these first 5 rows? That's my elementary. 6 onwards, right? Going into middle school. And I could actually group you and actually have a tree that's set up and that goes to elementary, and then it goes to grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. And then when it goes to middle school, you're talking 6 through 7 or 8. Right? And so when I'm actually looking at this, what we probably want to do is we probably want to make sure that we set this up to best practices. So I've got this example here that on my screen. I'm just going to zoom in for those in the room. But when I actually look at this, we've got the breakdown of staff and students. Because that makes it easy for us. If we want to change any setting for all staff, we change it at this level here, and it actually filters down. All of the ones below get it inherited from the one above. The same for students. But as you can see here, we've got this breakout elementary, middle, and high. Do you notice that? Because then I can set some settings just for all elementary students, all middle school students, all high school students, as we're looking at this. Now, I do have this going into school name afterwards, and this really depends on the size. Right? If we were actually dealing with a district that had multiple schools, then obviously we're going to the school level at that point. But I know in this room, and I know in Hawaii, right, generally we're going straight into the grades. But you notice I've got something else here, graduation year. And this really depends on how you're provisioning accounts. Earlier on, one of the things I was talking about in one of my other sessions at Admin Toolbelt was that user sync, the Amplified IT user sync. That allows you to go and integrate with your SIS automatically and populate your users straight into the OUs and keep that up to date. You wouldn't need this graduation year at that point. But if you were actually using a simple grad year, and if you're managing this manually, moving users yourself, then having the grade and then grad year makes it easier for us. And let's just take an example that we're high school. And we've got this year, our juniors are in our grade 11 and then 2017, right? That's their grad year for juniors, I think, if my math is correct. So then what would actually happen during the summer? We could just grab this OU that's called 2017 and move it down to grade 12. Right? We don't have to move all the individual students. We just move the actual OU underneath here. But it's not at that level, right? It's not at the grad year level is where we set any settings. We're actually setting on the one above. Because we're actually setting that based on the grade 12. And that means that every year we don't have to change the settings. The settings all stay the same. But we just move the container that's inside it. Right? And this might make your life a little bit easier for yourself. But of course, this really depends on your provisioning. Right? How you're doing provisioning. The best practice would be having that automatic, zero touch. Right? Because if it's zero touch for you, then you're not worrying about that. You're worrying more about the adoption and usage and other projects, right? And that's what I'd always recommend. A good example of that user sync tool to automatically create classroom classes, right? Directly from your SIS. And so that your teachers walk in and they have all the classroom classes there, or Hapara for the same reason as well. But let's look at a few more options here. Down the bottom of the screen, I've got 3 others, right? Whether that's graduates, right? So those students that have graduated out. Suspended, those students that have left our school, maybe gone to another. There's no need to go and delete their account. But I would suspend their account and I wouldn't leave it within the same grade. I would actually move it out. Right? The simple reason is that will keep them all organized for you. And again, this could be tied to your SIS, so it automatically moves them if they're no longer enrolled in your school. But that means that, as you probably know, some students might leave, and then they're going to turn back up at your school in a couple months' time, right? And this way that you can reactivate their account then and have access to it. So this last little tiny one, and some people might have seen this before as well, is obviously down the bottom I've got test. So what happens, has many people gone around to start changing settings within your Google Apps? how do you test to see if those settings work? I'm seeing some people cross their fingers. See if people scream. Right, well, one of these test OUs, by having 2 or 3 test accounts in this OU, I can move this in under the different structure the way I want. So if I really wanted to go and test that grade 11, I could move, or that 2017 OU, and I wanted to change some settings for them. I could have 2 or 3 accounts underneath this test OU, move this OU underneath that 2017. When I sign in with those test accounts, they will emulate my grade 11s or my graduates for 2017. But then if I wanted to, I could move that, and if I wanted to make a change for staff, I'd move that OU, test OU, up to my staff, and then sign in there with the same accounts, and they would emulate, because they're sitting underneath, they would emulate now a staff member. I change it on the test OU to test it out, and I wouldn't affect anyone in these OUs. When I know it works, then I would do it at a higher level, and maybe make that change either on that graduation year or further up that tree if we want to. So one of the questions I had within Pear Deck, here is what level of depth does your OU depth does your GAF domain contain? Do you do a flat OU structure, just the school OU, or schools first, grade-based OUs? And this might be just interesting for other people in the room to see what people are actually doing here. Now, I know that some people might be changing their minds as they're going through here, but we're dealing generally with, and I think that we're probably going to end up with mostly Ds in here. I'm going to guess because we're also dealing with a lot of smaller schools, independent schools in some ways rather than larger pieces. But those of you that were having this flat OU structure right up the top, right? This flat OU structure right up the top, that means that we can't make different settings for staff and students, right? So that's why we want to have this more granular piece. Cool. So let's go and move on a little bit faster and a little bit more detail here. So obviously that main reason for why we have structure is the ability to go and set different settings, but then also to make our life easier. As we're going through here, we don't have to go to all these different places to make changes. And that's why we need to think about this first and making sure our structure supports the way that we manage Google Apps. So therefore, I change it once on student, and it's changed on all of my students below it. So we've got to decide when we are changing a setting, what level do we want to change it at? Is this going to be for all elementary students or all of my students overall? Or everyone on my domain, and you choose which level to make it at. But those OU structures will also help us in other areas. So I guess this is another key thing, with schools. When we're going through this audit, and our way of actually working is that we go through and pull out every single setting from your domain. And actually we pull out lots of statistics from your domain as well. Right? We just go and scan Drive in a deep scan of Drive as well. But the key thing is we create a report and we say, this is what you have, this is what we would recommend changing, and this is why, and particularly this is how. And this comes up quite a bit. A lot of schools have too many admins. Right? I'm going to go into the going into the admin console and just show you what this really means. So when I go into the admin console, the easiest way to get in there, if you wanted to, was go to admin.google.com. That would open up your admin console, and I'm just showing a demo admin console. If you don't have all your icons here, then what you would need to do is click on More Controls, and you can drag icons up and down as you need them. But the one we're going to go and focus on right now is admin roles. So when I click on this admin roles, what you're going to notice is that right on the left-hand side, do you see where it says System Roles? It's actually Google's created these system roles for us. It said, hey, these are things I think you might be interested in. The top one is super admin. What super admins can do is completely and utterly delete the domain, change any setting. So what I would say is if you're like this, right, and this is our demo domain, if you're like this and have a lot of people in there, it's probably not a good idea, because that means they've all got the delete button, right? And so what we might want to do is choose what privileges certain people should have. You probably want to ensure that you're going to empower the relevant people at your school. But what you can do, instead of using these ones that are on the left here, you can create a brand new role. So if I go and create this new role, I'm going to call this Hawaii, if I can spell. One-handed, it was impressive, wasn't it, Wendy? All right, so once I've done that, I can choose what privileges. I can go all the way down and say, this is the kind of things I want them to have access to. So I'm going to just say, for example, users here, and I want them to be able to go and edit user accounts. When I go and click Save here, one of the things I just wanted to point out is when we go back to the admins and assign an admin, you'll notice that I could go and pick on someone like Peter Henry, because I picked on him a lot earlier. So once I pick on Peter Henry, I can also choose, does everyone see this? I can choose which OU, my organization structure, which OU do I want to give him access to. So that means that even if I do create admins and I give them certain permissions, they don't all have to have those permissions on the whole of my domain. So whether that's a breakdown of elementary, middle, and high, for example, and say, well, you can change or reset passwords on elementary students, or you can actually go and make changes on Chrome settings for elementary students, or high school students, or just students, not staff. So you can kind of delegate down roles as much as you want, but that can be both by privileges, but then also applied by OUs. So let's look at a couple more things here and just look under the hood in some ways of these admin roles, right? So one of the things I would say is just let's go and have a look from your perspective. How many super admins? When you look in your own admin console, do you know how many super admins? Right? If you wanted to jump in here and go to admin.google.com, you could see where people actually are. Right? And we can probably see as people are, some people have got 5 admins there. Now, I'm going to be completely and utterly random here and actually say none of you should be super admins. And here's the reason why. Yeah, of course.
Remind me that most of us, each of our schools is their own domain.
I know.
We don't have
a central piece.
You know, so we're not doing high school, middle, and elementary.
Yes,
and
but some actually might have, right? Some might have a K through 12. Is there many K through 12s here? I think that there are a few, right? But yes.
Not only public schools here, but yes.
Yeah. So the only thing is, what they will have is you might have K through 3, do you know, or K through 5, do you know, or whatever as a breakdown of that, and just have the separate pieces as well.
Yeah, I just didn't know if you knew our structure.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So and the DOE know how that's all set up. But one of the things here is, as we're looking at the admins, a lot of people actually get a lot of people involved in the school, right? And we would just want to make sure that we manage that in the right way. So one of the things here as well, on that super admin piece, what I'm saying is you shouldn't be super admins. Let me explain. Is that rather than the account that you use every day, like for example, my email address, my user account is timlee@amplifiedit.com. But rather than that being the super admin of the domain, what I might want to do is I might want to put a timlee-adm, right? A separate account that I'm using daily, right? That when I check my mail, that account does not have super admin or the delete button. But the one that if I wanted to go in and make some major changes, I sign in with this -adm. And the reason for that is so you don't leave yourself logged in, you know, on a computer randomly, and then somebody else has access to your admin console, right? And it does happen quite a few times within schools. So think about that, and you might want to go and consider just saying, hey, for those in the super admin roles, we're going to create a separate account for them.
If you're in your account and you want to go into admin, you are the same account, it still asks you for your password.
Yes, but if you leave yourself logged into the admin console, or if you've saved your password, you know, and some people do that as well.
You saved your password, but even if you save your password, it's still going to ask you for your
If you go to, yeah, but if you've left yourself logged into that admin.google.com, so it'll log you after 20 minutes. But some people leave themselves logged in there or save their password as well.
More importantly is when you leave your position, it's easy for the admin account to stay.
Yes.
To go to whoever.
Well, I mean, the admin, the ADM, another one could be created for another person, but I always recommend that you have that rather than just an admin at your school, have that so that it's assigned to a certain person. Because then what we can do is we can see that tracking within the admin console and see who's made changes rather than being a shared generic account.
We recommend for this one, have a separate super admin account and then we're logging out and using the copy. So now we're going to close it. And I don't
Yeah, I mean, that's one option. I mean, what we do is that we have something called two-factor authentication. On super admin accounts, you've just got to type in a PIN code that you'll get on your phone. And the thing is, just to let you know, I'm not trying to make it hard for you at all, but like the daily account that you use, you can actually give yourself another role, you know, a custom role that gives you access to all the things except for the delete button. right? And that's the one that you really need to worry about, because that's not very easy to get back from, right? But it's just more along lines of a security piece. You might want to think about that overall. So let's just go and have a look at a couple more things, right? There's a couple of things, you know, when we want to go and look at new features and new things that do come out. If we look at the admin console, there's a couple of areas that we can actually go and look at something, right? We definitely want to keep informed and make sure that we're aware of things. But if we're looking at the admin console, I'm just going to go to Home here. There's actually a button under Support, right? Under Support, then what you can do is obviously you can phone up Google Support, and that's great. But once we click on this, there is actually a little bit underneath Online Support, right all the way down here. There's a little Find Out What's New, right? The actual website is what'snew.googleapps.com, right? So that address is what'snew.googleapps.com. And I definitely recommend people actually going to that site, right? The simple reason is once you get here, there is a Google Calendar that shows you all the new features. For example, there's new changes or filters, themes, and layouts in Google Sheets, right, in iOS. Or, for example, next week, there's going to be new custom fields. But what you can do is you can go and click on this Google Calendar button at the bottom, and that would allow you to subscribe, right? So once you click on that Google Calendar, that could subscribe that to your account, and you'll see that calendar from within your own Google Calendar, right? And how many people set up notifications for their calendar so they get notified? Right, quite a few people? Awesome. So what you could do on a simple thing is on this calendar, be notified 5 days before a new release. And then therefore, you're always going to be notified before something comes out, right? And so that's something you maybe want to look at. But obviously, what we want to do is try and keep an idea of what's actually coming, right? And keep alert for new things that might be changing and everything else. So let's look at one of the other pieces on this slide as well. So I'm going to click on the 3 hot dogs on the left here, right? And I'm just going to go to another piece, which is called Reports. Let's go and look at this little section here. How many people have spent any time in this report section? A few? Cool. So there's lots of different things that we can see here. What I was saying to you just a second ago was that we can click on this Audit Admin and be able to see every change that's been made in our admin console. And as you can see here, Tim Lee made a role Hawaii. It shows me what time and also what my IP address was as well. But what I would actually say is as we're looking at this, this approach, if you wanted to keep track, if you're going to delegate down access to other people, and if you wanted to be notified when they've made certain changes, this actually gives us the ability to do that, right? So I've got someone here, and I'm going to go and pick on Stephen Gale. He's one of our consultants. And I'm actually going to go and type his username in here. When I do type in Stephen Gale, what that's actually doing is filtering all the changes that Stephen Gale has made on my domain. Now, if I wasn't sure about Stephen, right, one of the things I could do is I could click on Set an Alert. And what that would do is it would send me an email every single time that Stephen's making a change on my domain. So here's a couple of ideas. You might not need to do this, right? And I would probably, hopefully, you don't. But what I might suggest you do is if there's certain users in your school, like your principal, that you would want to know whenever their account got changed for some reason, then you could actually put their name in there, and you would be notified anytime that something changed on their account. Or even better than that, if you wanted to track if there were certain things like Gmail settings or Chromebook settings or other things you wanted to track or be notified when some changes, you could actually put those settings in at the top, the event name. But this actually works not only for the admin console. If I go back to reports, on this left-hand side, we can look at a lot of different things here. And I'm going to just show you two others. Drive. This actually shows me every single change or every single action that's happened on my Google Drive. I can see when somebody's viewed a Google Drive document. Now, why is this important? Well, there's only certain times you might go in here. Has anyone been, using Google Drive and maybe somebody shared something inappropriately? Right? Maybe shared something they shouldn't have? If that's the case, we can actually go and search for that file here and said, hey, has anyone downloaded a copy of this? Or has anyone actually viewed this? Is it actually a problem? Before we do anything, is it actually a problem? We can see all of those things here if we really wanted to. The last thing underneath this reports is another piece, right? How many of you are actually using Gmail within the room? Quite a few of you. Okay, so this is email log search. How many of you have actually been in a situation where a person says they didn't receive a certain mail? Right? What have you done in those situations? Sorry?
Send it again.
Send it again? Well, one of the things you can do is you can come in here and do an email log search. So I could actually do a sender or recipient. I'm going to go and type in Peter Henry at gaftest.com, type in his address, and I'm going to go and look for the last 7 days. When I do this search, this is actually going to show me all mails that came into his account. I'm not actually going to be able to see the content of the mail. I don't care about that. But I actually particularly want to know what happened to them. So this is like an email log search where we can actually go and say, hey, these are the mails. And I could see the fact that these were delivered. So I could click on this mail. I could see this came in, and I could say, hey, yes, it was delivered to your mailbox. If that was delivered to spam, it would show up there and say it was delivered to spam. If that was rejected, it would give me the reason why it was rejected. So it's certainly a good idea to know about this. It's going to make your life a little bit easier as well. So there's a lot of different options here when we're provisioning, right? There's a user provisioning pieces, and there's 3 key options that a lot of schools use, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier on. Manual CSV uploads, taking a CSV. Google Apps Directory Sync, and what that will do is that will tie to your Active Directory, or there's third-party solutions, right? And the third-party solutions, what that will do is that will give you a little bit more customization piece, right? And that's something that we talked about a little bit earlier on in the GAF Toolbelt one, is that there's this GAF Sync tool that we've created to sync both information coming straight from your SIS. Now I know that here in the DOE they can provide you a download or a file export of your SIS information, and this would automatically go and put students into the relevant OU or suspend their account or take action based on that contents of that SIS. But then also going a step further of that, provisioning classroom classes or Hapara. And that might be an idea for some schools if they wanted to. So let's go and look at this group side of things and talk about groups for a second. So Google Groups. We can use them in mail, right? And most of you are probably doing this already, mail distribution groups, right? So if we wanted to email multiple people, have like a department email address. Drive, we can use that same, like for example, English department. We can still use that same distribution group to share files with. So if we wanted to share all files with the English department, we could use that same distribution group or that Google group to share things. A calendar. If I wanted to share a calendar with multiple people, giving them access or subscribing them, again, I can use this, right, and use that same groups. And also classroom. So at the same time, we can use classroom groups to share or provision or give access to. Every classroom class actually has a group name, and a teacher can use that to then share, obviously with that class if they wanted to. Now, this is something that Google Play for Education, how many people have heard about Google Play for Education? A few people, right? And so when people think about Google Play for Education, what do you think about? Does anyone think of Android devices? A lot of people do, right? So this has actually been around for quite some time, but the actual program itself is winding down to manage Android devices, but you can still use it in the interim to actually go and push out Chrome extensions or Chrome apps. So let's look at this just for a second and just see what this can do. So I'm going to play.google.com/edu. Just taking this example. So this is play.google.com/edu. So if I actually wanted to, when I go to Chrome apps, people know this in my previous session, we talked about Chrome apps a lot. And what we said was we could push them out and make them mandatory for certain OUs. That's organization units. But under this program, what we can do is we can actually go and click on something like Pear Deck, or click on something, like Fluency Tutor. And then what I can do is I can click on Install. And when I click on Install, then what that's actually going to do is I can choose and say, hey, I want to install that just for Peter Henry. And once I click install, that's going to install it just for that one student. Or I could take it one step further and I could use Google Groups. So I could actually install something for all of my English department or for all of this class. So therefore, a teacher can actually go in here, and this is actually one of the nicest pieces, is that over on the left-hand side, there's the teacher access. And you could give certain teachers or certain people within your school access to this, so then they can push out apps to individual students or groups of students as well. And also, not only that, but they can revoke apps. So if I push this to you, I can actually revoke it and take it away from you as well. The other thing, just last thing on here underneath the books, as you can see, there are things like Great Expectations. I can actually go and push, assign this, or also preview it. So a lot of the free classics books, you could actually push out books to students so they could read those on any device as well. So that's actually Google Play for EDU. So when we're thinking about groups, we can use them in a lot of different circumstances, right? So having groups provisioned and having a set groups provisioned for both your teachers, but then also within your school is really important. So I'm going to ask the room here, going back to my Pear Deck here for a second, is what level of groups do you have currently, right? So within the room, right, how many people now, obviously school-based groups, are really not going to be applicable as much, but homeroom class groups or others, right? And when I'm talking about school-based groups, I guess the easiest thing to describe that as is like departments, like, for example, English departments and so forth. And grade levels is another good example, right? And so one of the things that I would actually be saying is you want to get as detailed as possible, and the best source of that is going to be your SIS data, because that means that as things change, you're automatically going to have those updated. You don't want to be managing these individually, right? And that's certainly something that we'd always recommend, and that's why that gap sync or the other kind of provisioning might make your life a little bit easier as you move forward. So that admin created groups, and let's just talk about this when we're provisioning groups. Admin created groups, you can manually create them in the console. They can also come in, if you've got Active Directory, they can sync across through that GADS that we're talking about earlier on. But also gap sync or some third-party integration as well. So they can sync straight across and be created. Now, one of the things I'm just going to point out, I'm going to jump to this really quickly. See, I don't think it's in here. I'm going to go and just show you guys this. So when we go back to, I'm going to go and click on this Google icon and come back to the start here. When I click on apps, I just want to show you just something under groups as well. When you click on this and click on Google Apps, we'll see all of these different tools down the side, but there's actually one called Google Groups for Business. How many people actually have this turned on? Right? So what I did was I clicked on the main dashboard, I clicked on Apps, I clicked on this icon, Google Apps, and then I have Google Groups for Business. Now the name is a bit weird, right? But what this actually does is if you have this service turned on, this gives us a lot more granularity of settings around Google Groups. You can choose to moderate Google Groups, for example, and say, well, these students, I know what you're like, right? So anytime you're going to go and send an email, I want to go and moderate that, right? So I can choose that, whether or not I want you to see it or not. Or also I could choose who could join Google Groups. But it also gives us an icon, right? It gives us this icon here. Underneath our little right-hand side, it gives us this little groups icon, which gives us the ability to go and create groups. So let's just go and click on the sharing settings for a second. I'm taking a deeper dive into this, but let's go and have a look. A lot of schools, if you do have that turned on, a lot of schools have this and have the ability and says, it simply says here, anyone on my domain can create groups. Is anyone in the room that got that? Anyone in my domain? So what that does mean is that basically any student can go and create a Google group that they want. So they could create Minecraft app, right, and start having discussions, which is great, right? It's a phenomenal idea, but you might want to monitor them, right? So I would actually recommend if you're going to be doing this, either make domain admins create the groups, or you can turn off Google Groups for Business for students. and actually tell them, saying, hey, you have to go to a teacher. If you want a Minecraft app group, that's fantastic to have discussions about Minecraft. But what you have to do is you have to go and get a mentor or a teacher to go in that group with you. But the problem as well with anyone in the domain creating groups, or the bigger problem, is your staff. When they go in there, they're going to create one called English Act, or Math Act, or History Act. Now, there might be multiple history teachers at your school, or multiple English teachers at your school, or multiple classes. And you've got to think about that. So coming up with a naming convention might be important for you, right? So if you are going to allow your teachers to create them, which I would recommend to you, but just you might need to monitor them in some ways. Because one of the things you're going to find, if those who have groups like this turned on, I create a group called Admin Act with all the administrative pieces for the school. By default, anyone in the school can join that group. Anyone in the school can view that group and view the postings in that group, which might not be applicable if you think about it. And also, if I use that to share files, if you joined that group, you would have access to all of our admin files. Right? So you might want to go and check out what's happening under your group section as well. So that's why I'm thinking that maybe if you're looking creating a structure, you probably want to create the structure of what groups, and then whether that coming in from your SIS.
If I wanted to turn off the users,
Yeah, so there's two ways of doing that. You could actually go and say only domain admins. So then you could delegate down the people that you want to create groups, whether that's people within your school that you want to raise up that permission. You give them an admin role that allows them to manage groups, right? Or the other way is that we go back up to this page here, right? So we go up to this page here, and what we say is we don't want Google Groups for Business to be on for every single organization. So we say it's on for some organizations, and we could turn it off for the students OU. So then staff have access to it, but students don't. Right? Do you see how that works? Cool. So let's go and look at some other pieces, right? Services and applications. Right? And when we're looking at all different applications within Google, there's two different distinguishing groups. There's the Google apps, which are the core apps of our service. Right? Those are things like Drive, Mail, Classroom, right? They're awesome tools. But then there are some other applications, and let's go and look at these. Within your admin console, right, when I clicked on Google Apps, these are all the core apps. This is what you've got SLA for, you know, and your contract for. But once we click on this other one that's in the middle here, additional Google services, there's 14. So when we're clicking on this, what you'll see is I've got a whole list of different services. Now, do you notice it says 14 here? It's got 14 in this list. Actually, if you go over here to the right-hand side and click on this X button, you're going to notice that we don't have 14. We've got 57 or so. I think it's 54 now. But if we scroll down here, there's a lot of other services that are in here that are hidden by default. But actually, a lot of them are on. So we might want to go and configure, and I guess this is the key thing, is configuring what services are on for which level of our school as well. So can anyone tell me some age ranges? Is there any services you know that are listed in here that have maybe an age range applied to them? Sorry? Hangouts? Well, Hangouts used to, because it used to tie into Google+. Right, and now it's separated from Google+, so it's not as tied in, but the Google+ certainly does, right? So this is the one here. So if we scroll down here, there's Google+ that's in here. That's over 13s, so 13s and over. So what we might want to do, instead of saying that's on for everyone, what we might want to do is click on for some organizations and choose which level within our school that we want to turn that on. Right? Does anyone know what happens with Google Plus if we have that on for younger students?
They get locked out.
They got locked out of their account.
Their account they have to start all over.
And it's not the Google Plus account, it's actually the whole Google account.
Yeah.
So what actually happens is it locks it out. You've got to contact Google support and then turn off Google Plus for their OU, and then they'll re-enable the account for you, right? If it's a staff member, who simply just put in the wrong date of birth, which does happen, right? Because someone basically says that they were born yesterday, and Google's like, well, you're under 13, and automatically suspends their account. So if that happens, then you can actually change their birth date as well, right? So you can actually go and find the person and change their or correct their date of birth.
And it will come back in?
And it will come back in.
The time we did it, we had to make a new account for the person and then add an alias and it worked.
Yeah, so yeah, if you go in there, you can actually go and just correct their date of birth. But I think that one of the big things I would say is that for your students, you want to make sure that you're turning off Google Plus for their OUs, so they shouldn't have access to this. But there are other services, like things like location history. How many people have used location history in the past? Has anyone seen this? Right? So obviously location history gets tracked by things like your phone, right? So if I actually just go onto here, let's go and have a look really quickly. Google.com/location history, and what this is going to do is hopefully when this does come up, this will show me all the places I've been in the last little while, right? So this is actually going and tracking exactly where I've been. So rather than that, if I just go and say, hey, this last, or let's say looking today or yesterday, right? So let's go back and look at yesterday. This shows me exactly where I've been. So as you can see, I walked and we went up the falls yesterday, right? So one of the things that I would say is this is tracking every movement based on my phone. I've signed into my account on my phone. So here's a question. Does your acceptable use policy have something in it that says we're going to put an ankle bracelet on your students? Right? Your parents probably would love you for doing that, but I don't think you probably do. So we probably want to turn off location history for not only our students, but probably our staff. But just so we're very clear, this isn't really as much of a privacy concern, because Ryan, as an admin, I can't get into your location history. But unless I reset your password or I had your password, then I could. I've only used this once in my life for actually a proper use case, and that was in Rhode Island, right, when it was snowing, 4 foot of snow, and I couldn't find my car. But the scary thing is, this is actually showing you times when I was at the different places. And I was able to find exactly where my car was parked based on this location history. So it was useful once, but all the rest of the time, probably not, right? So again, when we're in our admin console, we might want to choose to turn off some of these services. Another good example of that would be Google Voice, right? Does anyone use Google Voice? Yeah? So do you mind me asking what you're using it for?
Use it for authentication.
Yeah. So one of the things with Google Voice is it gives you a cell phone number. And people call that cell phone number, and that can either be patched through to your own cell phone or also through to your Hangouts. But you probably don't want to give all your students a new cell phone number, right? Again, something we might want to turn off. But for staff, it's very useful because then that gives them a number that they could give out to parents rather than giving out their personal phone number. Not that I know of, right? They do have unlimited free phone calls from US to Canada or anywhere in the US cell phones as well. I'm not sure how long that's staying around, but that's certainly at the moment. I could call any cell phone in the US or Canada for free through Google Voice. But it's actually a really good platform also for foreign language teachers. Because if a student's actually going to go in and call their teacher's Google Voice number and gets answer machine, it delivers the MP3 of their voicemail to the person's mailbox. So then the teacher can actually just go and listen to them speaking in French or in German or whatever that language may be. And that's fantastic. It's a nice, easy way to record. But schools are also using it for things like students calling or parents calling in, saying that their child's not turning up to school today. And they have like a communal Google Voice account that allows other people to get that message.
Well, one vacation in Hawaii is the 808 area code.
Is it, there isn't one, or is there?
Well, the last time when I tried to set it up, it wouldn't let me
Pick one from this area.
Code.
Yeah. I don't, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. Again, the other thing is in Canada, which is really strange. They can go and create accounts, but they can't choose Canadian numbers. They need to choose US numbers, which is the same kind of thing. So just picking on just one or two more, right, really quickly. Google Takeout. Has anyone ordered from Google Takeout before? Right? So the key thing is Google Takeout is not a takeout food place, but what it is if we go to google.com/takeout, what that allows us to do is download all of our stuff out of Google itself. So if I wanted to take away all my information, I can do that. So one of the things that's nicest thing about this is actually YouTube. I love it for that. If anyone's got YouTube channels and want to download all their videos, their videos themselves, this is a great way to do it. But your students that are graduating, or staff that are leaving, if they want to download their data, that's an easy way for them to do it. Right? So I think it's the only way right now would be the easiest way. It doesn't come down and bring down Google Sites in a nice format, but hopefully you can share what the easiest way is. If I own a site, I could actually go in there and I share my site with my Gmail account, and I can go and click on there and say make a copy. Right? So if I make an outside editor, if I make you can't transfer ownership of the original site, but you can actually make a outside person an editor of a Google site. And then once you've done that, you can actually say make a copy, and that will make a copy under your Gmail account. Not between domains. So the site is always tied to a domain. Within a domain, yes. Within a domain, yes, but not actually outside, not from a school to your personal account. So if I was like graduating or if I was leaving.
And if you're new to Google Doc to your site, you have to then
move the doc, unfortunately. So when we come to e-portfolios and things like that, I actually always recommend people creating e-portfolios on Google Drive and actually just embedding the Google Drive, like the file archive, inside, embedding a folder inside a Google site. Because then when a student takes their e-portfolio away, they're taking their Google Drive. That's the most important side, because that's actually got the data in. Google Sites is just a way of looking at it in a nice little fashion.
Is there anything else on that list?
There's quite a few, actually.
That absolutely has to be turned off?
Well, if we're looking down here, when we go to YouTube, YouTube is over 13 as well.
Oh, is it?
So it is, and I would definitely recommend when you turn off YouTube, right? Don't think that all your teachers are going to run with you at pitchforks, right? That's not going to be the case. This is just going to stop them creating a YouTube channel or uploading YouTube. The other one that I'd maybe mention is Google Groups, right? Is another one in here. So let me just go back here for a second, because a lot of people get or confused about what this really does. So Google Groups, which is down here somewhere. Did I miss it? There we go. Google Groups. So a lot of people don't really realize this isn't Google Groups in your domain. This is groups.google.com. These are public Google Groups. Now this might seem fantastic, and I think it's fantastic for your teachers. If I click on Browse All, this looks fantastic over here, arts, entertainment. But there's one over here that I'm going to zoom in on, right, which might not be really appropriate for your students, right? I'm going to keep on zooming, right? But one of the things I'd just be saying here is the fact that you can turn off mail internally. You can actually go and restrict your whole domain. But if they've got access to Google Groups, and they can actually join these Google Groups and have discussions you wouldn't even know about. So what we really want to do is instill digital citizenship, make sure they understand what they're doing before they go forward. So coming and looking back at our little piece here and sliding back, I'm going to go and pick on a couple of things, right? And I'm just going to be talking about a couple of the main core service settings. We're not going to go into them as detailed, but tomorrow during the what's next on your roadmap, we can go into these a little bit more. Underneath mail, there's objectionable content. There's an option to set objectionable content. And what that can mean is basically I can have a whole long list of words, and I can say anyone, right? Anyone that is sending an email with this objectionable content, automatically send that to the principal or to the counselor or whomever within the school. And that would just basically, instead of being sent through to the person, so if I'm bullying you, it gets redirected to Wendy. Actually, more, it's Wendy bullying me, right? It gets redirected to you, because that's what Wendy does all the time. So one of the key things I would just be saying there is we probably need different lists. Right? There might be one for bullying or offensive content. There might be another one for more social welfare. Right? And you can choose whether or not I want to block that mail and get redirected, or simply add on another person onto that mail. And it's really powerful if we do that and make sure that that goes to someone who's actually going to take action. Right? So to support digital citizenship. Google Drive. Within Google Drive, we can create a walled garden. Bless you. And what a walled garden would do is that basically means that our students are in elementary, 1st through 3rd grade. They can't share outside our domain. Or also, they can't have files shared with them. But this allows them to understand and be able to use these school tools properly and actually build digital citizenship. So that's called a walled garden. And so we can actually just say, hey, they can't go through. But if you really want to, right, if we just go and pick on this and say, well, your school over here, I don't mind this school. They can share with these other schools, and you can put in the domain names of the schools you want them to be able to share with. They just can't share in public. Yes, it is, yeah. Do you want me just to go into here? Let's go and see what we've got time for. Let's jump in here. So this is under apps. So all of these are under apps here, and let me just go and jump back in here. So this is a walled garden. You can do this as well with Gmail, but we're going to be talking about Drive here. So underneath the admin console, what we're going to do is we're going to click on apps, and we're going to go and click on Google Apps, and then we're going to click on Drive. So right here, what we can do is under sharing settings for Drive, we can go and click. Do you notice I've got my OU structure on the left-hand side? So I'd have to, if this was just the elementary students, I could click on elementary, and I could say, well, actually, they can't share at all. See, that's off. And then I could also check this button underneath, which says allow users to receive files. And when I do that and I click on save, that would mean that basically they can't receive files or send files. Right down at the bottom, what we do have is the ability to go and whitelist, right? If we want to go and give them whitelisted domains, and we could say, well, they can actually go and share with these 5 different domains as well. Cool. So let's go forward and move forward in a few other things. Google Calendar. Again, if you went into apps, calendar, and then sharing settings, what you'll probably find, and this is something we find all the time, schools have actually got their primary calendars, which is basically your calendar, my calendar, principal's calendar, set to share all information, which basically means that everyone can see all the information on that Google Calendar. It might not be appropriate. Right, and this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about here that our audit tries to go and resolve, because that's actually a person, when they see that happening, when a situation comes up, when a teacher sees a principal's calendar that something's going on, or a student sees what's going on in another person's calendar, because there might be personal information or other things in there, people get worried about privacy, and it's just the fact that we've got the setting incorrectly. Right, so what I would do is say, share, free or busy. That means that basically by default you can see if I'm free or busy, but that doesn't stop me sharing my calendar with you if I want to. So a principal can share it with their secretary, or teachers can share across their team. But by default you can't see all the information. So let's go forward into a couple more things. Classroom creation. Again, underneath the apps, going down to Classroom, you can choose who can create Google Classroom classes. Right? You do. Right, and I definitely recommend that, because basically you probably don't want students creating their classroom classes, right? Because this means that they create a classroom class and they can have discussions and everything else. But I mean, it's great for them to do it, and I recommend that might be where you want to get to. But one of the things is make sure you've got a digital citizenship program to guide them when they're doing that. So just looking at this last little one, this is actually in the additional apps. Right? Remember how we went and looked at Google+, how we could turn that off for certain OUs? Actually, if you click on Google+ there, you've got a whole bunch of settings. Let me just fire this up just really quickly here. All right? So if I go and click on apps, I'm going to go and click on the middle one here, and I'm going to go all the way down to Google+. When I click on this, halfway down this page, actually on the advanced settings, halfway down this page, there's a little option. It's kind of hidden. Edit name. By default, it's actually checked. This edit name. This allows teachers or students who have Google+ access to be able to rename themselves. So if you're wondering why some students are called Jazzy Jeff or Ice Cube or whatever it happens to be, right, in your actual domain, in your address book, this is because they've renamed themselves. Right? And it's painful. So what I would definitely recommend, there's no use case for this whatsoever. Right? So you might want to turn that off, and there's a couple other options. Just taking this example, Hangouts on Air, that's what Wendy's doing right now, of being able to broadcast this across. And there's Hangouts on Air here. So you can actually turn that on if you want your teachers to be able to use Hangouts on Air. By default, it's off. So again, these are barriers of entry for a lot of schools. Let's go through here and just looking at restricting additional services, and this is what we started talking about: Google Groups, Voice, and Google Location History, or those age restrictions of Google Plus and YouTube. Now, in my session earlier, I talked about this in a lot more deeper than I would do now, but one of the things, if you haven't gone into your Chrome management in your user settings, go and set up Chrome to be able to support your initiatives, whether that's loading certain pages. I think one of the things we talked about earlier of actually going and creating a custom Chrome web store, right? And that custom Chrome web store allows us to recommend apps for students to go and install. And there's a lot of different things that we can do under that Chrome management. But one of the key things that we were just talking about earlier was Gmail scanning, but then also Google Drive scanning. Right, things that we've got on Google Drive, if we want to make sure that students are not going to be sending bullying messages to each other to support digital citizenship. The same for that Gmail as we're talking about the objectionable content, but that might also extend a bit further. You probably don't want your staff or your students sending social security numbers in Gmail. We can go and automatically say if they do send that, that gets blocked or rerouted to an administrator to deal with. Right, and again, this is the key thing. What we want to do is we want to support our students, allow them to make mistakes. Don't completely block them in. Allow them to make mistakes and actually give them some guidance in supporting them. Right, because you want them to make mistakes at our school so that when they go further on within their education, they're going to learn from that and not carry out that piece. The one that I've actually got here and just talking about the Google Drive scanning, that is a third-party tool. And that's something that a lot of schools are starting to play with, things like CloudLock. I think a couple people have CloudLock in this room or have used CloudLock before. And if anyone wants some details on that. But one of the key things, a lot of people think that by going into this drive scanning, they've got unlimited storage, unlimited files. They think that it's going to be a huge job, but it's really not. It's usually about 1 or 2%, account for 75% of the risk. There's people within your school that manages, student IDs, maybe credit cards or other things within your, your schools. Those are people we might want to put some more drive scanning around, or a simple thing of actually just saying, hey, for students, for bullying, we want to set up this kind of practice. So and then if it's any of these kind of words, not only in email, but then also in Drive, it automatically gets a message put to the principal, but also stops that file from being shared. So it's certainly something that we might want to think about. And I think that the key thing for Drive, a lot of people think that there's no way to do this, but there are some key third-party tools that would help us support the digital citizenship. And that's one thing, a lot of people are still teaching digital citizenship. It's not about that. It's about instilling it for when they're using these tools, that the digital citizenship program is invisible. As soon as I start veering to the left or to the right and going off target or off course, then this would actually come in and correct me as I go forward. Last couple of questions here, and going through these things. The walled garden, we talked about that restricting Drive, but also the email sharing as well. But if you are going to be doing that, make sure that you've got a graduation piece out of it. The students graduate and learn out of it before they leave your school, right? So even if you're in elementary school, you might have 5th graders and say, well, you can share it by the time you get to 5th grader, maybe you can share outside your domain. And being able to share to parents, so then they've got a kind of a graduation piece. Now, usually schools actually, when they get to middle school, then they allow their students to be able to share with their parents and so forth. But again, that's really up to you and how you instill it as you go forward. This is the last little piece that I'm just going to go into, and I know that I've skipped quite a few questions here on my pair deck here. But one of the things that I would actually just be pointing out here is just making sure you've got that adoption plan. Working out what you really want to achieve. What are your metrics that you're going to follow? What are the reports we want to look at? Are we looking at how much usage is happening within our domain? Are we actually tracking who's actually doing what? Are we helping them, and being able to identify? A simple thing with a tool that we're talking about earlier, Google Vault, was a way that we could actually track who's still sending attachments of Word and Excel. Do we need to go and work with them on Google Drive, right? But even if it goes a little bit further into looking at Google Classroom, who's not got Google Classroom classes? Who's not using that? Like, who's using these tools every day? So this is the thing, is being able to go and set up your kind of adoption plan, but then also measure that. Measure your success and say, this is what we want to try and achieve. And then be able to go and help people get to that point. Try to work through all the different tools that you're using. Right? And I think that this is one of the questions, that we're always trying to get people to think about. How would we actually gauge GAF usage, to link to student success? And there's lots of different examples of that within schools. But the key thing is making that invisible. And certainly one way of not making that invisible is putting hurdles in front of teachers. Because they will actually, as soon as they hit one of these hurdles, they will be turned off the tool. Right? Or they'll feel that it's another straw on their back of having to go and create all of these things. So just finishing up here, I guess one of the things I just wanted to ask just at the end, as we went through this, and this is the tip of the iceberg in some ways of what we do in our GAF audit, how do you feel that your GAF domain is configured when we've done this again compared to what we started with, right? And I think that, let's see how this is actually shown. Do I just have a cross in here? Yeah. This is an epic fail on a pear deck. I use Pete's pear deck, right? I'm going to blame him. I'm just going to allow you to draw around your screen because that was going to be positive and negative, right? So this is Pete's fault.
Just advanced mathematics.
So this is just I'm measuring your success, right? What I was going to have is your scale of where you feel that you are on the scale is supposed to happen.
Really learning.
That is learning, all right, in the great, and I'm just going to say, because we're on Hangout on Air, hopefully Pete's listening, and I can blame him because I used his pear deck. But I'm just going to pause it because you guys are moving around so much. But the key thing, I guess, to point out just at the end, this is the tip of the iceberg. If anyone thinks that they've deployed Google Apps fully, think again. I've been working with this for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And there's always something new. Google will always reach out something new. But the key thing is don't get stressed about it. Get used to doing 1 or 2 things. If you create that plan, you don't have to do everything now. Build on it. Get other people involved in it. The key thing is remove all these hurdles as much as you can. Right? And then one of the key things that we're trying to do is bring people together and share best practices as much as possible. There's some good Google Plus GAF admins, Google Plus communities, and everything else. But one thing just to lay out, we've worked through this with multiple schools here in Hawaii and actually, obviously, abroad as well. But one of the key things is our GAF audit goes and reviews every single setting that you've got in your GAF domain. So you're getting an actionable list of knowing exactly what you might need to do, but then also how to do it as well. So if you don't have a roadmap, I certainly would recommend this because you're certainly going to get a lot out of it. If you're rolling out 100, 200, 300 Chromebooks, make sure that they're set up for success if we're going to invest that money. Right? But that's one of the key things just to point out here. There's other things about our services that we do, but the key thing is I'm here in the next 2 days as well. Feel free to corner me. Happy to answer any questions. And we do have, I know we're running a little bit late, but we do have maybe some questions on today's meet as well.
Mitch has been online and getting the